Okay, so what I want to do today really is just to go into a couple of the ideas that come up on Shabbos that are no longer doraisa. We really spoke a lot about the doraisas. What I want to look at is the fundamental drabonin, and perhaps even if we just do one this week, because I'd like to actually do something to do with Shabbos, and then I'd like to also do a little bit of stuff on the Pesach Seder. I think it's important for us to engage 30 days before the Chag. It's an important thing to try and do, and so let's do that. I hope everybody's okay with that. So what I want to look at really is the Darabonan din of what's called Shahir. What does Shahir mean? Shahir means leaving. On a simple level, it's the category of halacha that deals with placing food on the fire on Friday, Erev Shabbos, and then leaving it on a flame over Shabbos. So now, the thing about that is that if you do that, there's an issue of the cooking on it. We're talking about replacing it Erev Shabbos. We're not cooking anything in additional specifically. And there's a whole machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, which I don't want to go into, about whether your pots can actually do malacha. Because if your pots can do malacha, then according to Beis Shammai, they can. Therefore, you can't have anything to do with malacha. And Shabbos becomes quite a difficult space because it means that you can't use your pots to continue a process that you've started even on Shabbos itself. But we hold like Beis Hillel that says we don't have to worry about it, and therefore it's not a problem. Okay, if we do go through this, let's have a look and understand where the Gemara begins to this process, because it's important for us to understand the basis of it. And once we understand the basis of it, we'll get it. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share the Gemara with you, or the Mishnah actually, where it comes from, and then we're going to start having a bit of a deeper look at this Mishnah. So the Mishnah here, it's a Mishnah in Gemara in Shabbos, on Shabbos 36b, that's Lamed Vav Amud Beis, and the Mishnah says Kira. A kira is a kind of a stove. Okay, so a kira shesikua bakash uvigvava, a kira that is lit with kash, which is straw, or gvava. Gvava is like you just find like pieces of grass and things. It's not really wood. It's just like scrapings and things of that nature. Noshlim alei tafshil, on such a things, Erev Shabbos. Okay, even on Shabbos, so you can put the pot on it. We're talking about a pot that's already been cooked. You can put the pot on Shabbos. Why is that? Because since these things are not going to last for long, any heat that's in them is very limited, and then eventually they're just going to just fizzle out. But begefet va'etzim. But if you've done with gefet, and gefet is heavy words. That's vines or eitzim or trees. Lo yitain ad sheyikrov. You can't put anything on it. Erev Shabbos, even on Shabbos itself, ad sheyikrov, until such time as you've raked the coals away, or ad sheyitain sa'efer, or until such time as you've put dust or dirt onto these coals, because that will minimize the ability for them to be stoked up. Now, what the issue is with the stoking is that if you stoke coals on Shabbos, and this is important, if you stoke coals on Shabbos, then you go against what's called the malacha of mavir, which is creating fire. Just by stoking the coals, you increase the fire, and increasing the fire, so then obviously it becomes a problem of creating fire, and that becomes a problem of the malacha of Shabbos. Okay, so if that's the case, so now we understand that this havara problem is a problem. So therefore, what we come up is this idea as a principle which is called Shema Yechateh B'Chalim, the concept of lest you stoke the coals. I'm sorry that I don't have the normal slides that I have. I just haven't had the opportunity to do that. But what I will show you is I'll show you what this whole thing means. Shema Yechateh B'Chalim. This is the idea of Shema Yechateh B'Chalim. gechalim. Those are important words, which means lest you stoke the coals. And the problem, as we said, is the issue of havara. Okay, so just are you able to see the whiteboard, or are you able to see the screen? If you could just tell me.
I can see writing on a whiteboard.
Okay, cool, fine. Okay, so I'm going to come back and forth to the whiteboard. Okay, so we've got this idea of the Shema Yechateh B'Gechalim, and now we need to understand what Chazal instituted is, because this concept of Shema is that you have to be careful what you do before Shabbos in order to leave food on something to ensure that food keeps warm, so that when you come back from shul, you can actually have decently cooked food. Okay, so number one, if you remember, we spoke about this concept of ma'achal ben drusai, this food that is being cooked up to the point of ben drusai. So now there's a massive debate. It's unbelievable that there's certain debates that are huge, and they go backwards and backwards forwards. So the Gemara in Shabbos, in that exactly where we were, is a debate between the Chachamim and Hanania. The Chachamim say that that the Shehiyah concept is this concept of leaving food Erev Shabbos on the flame is absolutely forbidden unless the food is completely cooked. Okay? Or if it's not completely cooked, any cooking will make the food worse. Make it worse. So if you're going to overcook it, that's called mitstamek veralo. It cooks it more, but it's viralo, but it's bad for it. Hanania says, on the other hand, no, we're talking that this issue of shehiyah doesn't apply to cooked food, but rather it applies to ma'achal ben drusai. And if it's ma'achal ben drusai, then it's going to just by definition cook a little bit more, and that'll improve the cooking. And so therefore he says it's a problem. So there's huge debate, as we say, amongst the Rishonim, but ultimately we come out with the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch rules like the Chachamim. The Chachamim who say that it's fully cooked food and it's stomach veralo. But the Ramah, on the other hand, says no. You should even paskin. You must paskin like Hananya, which is this. So the Mishnah Brura says the following. He says you should rather rule like the Chachamim. In other words, be careful to rather be sure to use only fully cooked food. Okay. And that's really what our general minhag is, that we're careful about the fully cooked food. Under certain circumstances, you can leave uncooked food on shehiyah and not fully cooked food, and we can sort that out. Now, this is not talking necessarily only about a cholent. So cholent has a certain things, but let's understand. Okay, so what are you supposed to do? You want to leave this food in somewhere, or something in order to ensure that it stays warm. So how do you do it? So shehiyah does not apply if you're able to do certain things. Remember, we said the whole thing of is this concept of Shema Yechateh B'Gechalim. So if you remove the coals, if you've got a braai, let's say you cook things on a braai, if you take out the coals, you just have the heat of the place, so then you don't have to worry about it. But where else do we have? So we have hot plates. Are you allowed to leave your food on a hot plate? Okay. So the hot plates then also have different types of hot plates, and that's important for us to understand. So hot tray, we would call it. Okay, so if you've got a hot tray, in the old days they used to use what was called a blech, and a blech where you leave the oven on, and you take a piece of metal, and we spoke about this before, and your sheet of metal, and you put the sheet of metal on the oven, and then you create it into a certain place. However, what about a hot tray? Now, there are two types of hot trays. There's the hot tray that has a thermostat, so you can make it hotter and you can make it warmer and hotter. Right? That all depends on how you really want the thermostat to be. And then there's the other hot tray that has just got no thermostat. Now, if it's got no thermostat, right, it doesn't require a blech. It doesn't require anything, because it just is what it is. You can't turn it up, you can't turn it down. The whole purpose of the blech is a heker, or a prevention of putting in the putting up the fire, and so therefore you don't have to worry about when it doesn't have a thermostat. But when it does have a thermostat, so then you would have to cover that thermostat to make sure that you don't cover it. Now, what about hot water urn? Like an urn, okay? So on an urn, how does that work? You just leave your urn on. Now, if you leave your urn on, then that's shahir. You've got something that's boiling, that's hot, and you've left it to cook on Shabbos. Do you, in that case, have to cover the urn to make sure that you don't make it hotter and colder? Seems to be that the general rules we rule leniently, but there are specific types of urns that you can get in Eretz Yisrael. For example, where you push a button and it's got a keep warm function, and the keep warm function ensures that it stays warm, but it's different. So the urn there may be some issues, but we're not going to go into that whole thing. When the food is completely cooked, we understand that there's no prohibition of shahir. That we pass like chachamim, okay? And because also, if you remember, anytime if something's completely cooked, if you cook a little bit more, then it's going to lessen the quality of the food. So we can be there. So therefore, what about leaving your food in the oven? Can you leave your food in the oven? That's fully cooked. I'm not talking about where it's still cooking. So you could theoretically leave the food in the oven if it's fully cooked, because it's not a problem. Now there comes the question about a cholent. Now, cholent is quite a complicated one. So number one, we understand the cholent, if you put it on just before Shabbos, it will depend on the nature of the cholent. Because if you put it on just before Shabbos to cook, so then it would seem to be that you've gone against the principles of Shia. You've put something that is not cooked, and you've put it onto a flame just before Shabbos, and can you do such a thing? So the answer to that really is that you shouldn't do it unless you've covered the inside of the cholent pot and you've covered the switch that it can't be changed. Because if your cholent isn't going to cook so well, then you might want to change it. However, there's an exception, and that's an exception that's brought by the Shulchan Aruch, and that is that if you put completely raw meat into your cholent pot just before Shabbos, it's absolutely clear that meat is not going to be ready for Friday night, for Shabbos meal. And so therefore, since the food will get ready without having to mix the cholent up, you just leave it in the cholent pot. So then we're not worried about Shemi Yechata B'Gecholim that you're going to try to turn it up, because at the end of the day, you don't have to worry about it. It's just going to cook through the night. And so therefore, you've got what's called Kederech Hayasa. A Kederech Hayasa is like it's a living thing that just continues on its own. And since that's okay, it's all right. Okay. And so therefore, when it comes to a piece of raw meat which you put in your cholent, you can do it just before Shabbos. I mean, the issue really becomes for us is that what happens when you've got load shedding? So load shedding complicates it, and we don't have time. Each one of these things needs to be discussed carefully. But when it comes, because of load shedding, ideally, what we really should do is cook up the cholent before Shabbos, so that you don't have that issue of it coming on and off like over Shabbos and cooking over Shabbos in that way. Rather, one should try and cook it at least to the Machal ben Drusai before Shabbos, and then it makes it just a little bit more easy and palpable and workable to use. Okay, so that's an important thing for us to understand, fundamentally, actually, for us to understand. Okay, so that is really the shahir stuff. There's also a couple of other things. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of a wonder bag. So the wonder bag is a fascinating contraption. I'll show you a picture of it just so that you can see what it looks like. For those who've got one, it's great. For those who don't have one, you should get one, because it's a brilliant idea. So this is the wonder bag. If you can see my screen, let's give you there. So what the wonder bag does is that the Wonder Bag, it's a South African invention, and what it does is really made for poor people, but it's been quite a hit amongst others, especially for us. Why? Because you don't want to leave things on the stove because you can't turn the stove off. So the Wonder Bag insulates and in a way also continues the cooking process. And it's an amazing thing to have. And what you could and can do with it is that, for example, your soup there, this lady's putting her soup into the Wonder Bag, you heat it up, and then instead of worrying about whether it's going onto a hot tray or anything like that, you put it in the Wonder Bag, you cover it up, and you close it. And food that's completely cooked can be closed 100%. There's no issues whatsoever, and retains its warmth. That's something to think about. And there's much more on it. Okay, so we've done a few minutes on Shabbos. If you don't mind, what I really want to focus on for the next 2 weeks, well, there's 3 weeks actually, is really to focus on the Seder and on halachic aspects of the Seder, as well as perhaps some hashkafic things that come with the Seder as well. So if we go into the, is that okay with everybody? Are you happy with that? I just think it's a nice opportunity. We've got to learn those halachas. Is everyone okay with that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I just want to ask you, is there no
Sure.
Hatmana with there is no problem with Hatmana in the Wonder Bag?
So with the Wonder Bag, there's no issue of Hatmana because it doesn't cook it. It doesn't add, it's not moisture hevel. It doesn't add the heat. It just retains the heat and it uses that heat to maintain heat. So there's no issue of Hatmana. I looked that up as well. I was worried about it. If you're going to put food on Erev Shabbos, you don't have to worry about Hatmana. If you're going to do it on Shabbos itself, so you want to, like, let's say, keep your children warm, then you can't cover it on the top. But before Shabbos, there's no issue whatsoever. Okay. Okay. So let's look at let's go into parts of the Seder. What I read this morning was a beautiful idea from Rav Soloveitchik. And Rav Soloveitchik explains that the world that we live in is this halachic world that we live in. Really, everything gets defined. Everything has a measurement. And without those measurements, so then we've got nothing. We've got no way to measure our progress in the performance of those mitzvot. And what I want to really look at as a beginning part to get to that is the strange mitzvah of karpas. It's a strange mitzvah. It's a really, really, really strange mitzvah. So we know we say Kadesh, we make Kiddush, and there's a lot about Kiddush and sanctification of ourselves. Kadesh, Urachat, we wash our hands, and then we come to this thing called karpas. And the reason why it's so fascinating is, what is this concept of karpas? Why do we even have karpas? I just want to ask you, why do we even have karpas? Anybody want to venture a reason?
I will ask questions.
So what does that even mean? So the reason we have karpas, just hear what you're saying. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. The reason you have karpas is why? Is in order that we'll ask questions. What question? What do you mean? How can you do something in order to ask questions? And what are the questions that you're supposed to ask? Do you understand what I mean?
You're saying, like, why
Because
Dafka the karpas?
Sorry, say again.
Are you asking why Dafka karpas?
I'm asking why Dafka at karpas do we do something in order to ask questions? And now that we're asking questions, what are the questions that we're supposed to be asking that we're asking because it's Dafka karpas?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a very, very, very strange animal, this karpas. And it demands something of an understanding of it. Do you understand what I mean? So if you look at the Gemara says that the reason why we have karpas is in order for the kids to ask a question. Okay. So what questions should they be asking? I suppose there isn't anything specific that they should be asking. And when should they ask the question? So perhaps the answer, when I should ask the question, will come from what we do with the karpas. So if you look into our Seder, hold on, sorry. If you look into the Seder, you'll see the way our general rule is, when it comes to the Seder, what we say is the following: karpas. We take from the karpas less than a kazayit. Why? In order that we don't become obligated in the brocha achrona. We dip it in salt water, we make the brocha of Borei Pri Adama. Okay? And through the brocha of Borei Pri Adama, we also try and pater the brocha on the maror, and we eat it without haseva. Okay? So the Rambam says something fascinating. The Rambam says, you know what? When it comes to karpas, you actually should eat a kazayit. Now, none of us eat a kazayit. He says you should eat a kazayit. That's according to him. According to the Shulchan Aruch, which paskins like the Rosh, you shouldn't eat a kazayit. Why shouldn't you eat a kazayit? Now, listen carefully to this. Because according to the Rosh, the reason why you don't eat a kazayit is because there's no mitzvah of eating karpas. Okay? There's no mitzvah of eating karpas. Karpas is just like kind of like part of the process of the Seder. It's not an independent mitzvah in and of itself. And since it's not a mitzvah to eat it, you don't have to fulfill the minimum measurement of eating, which is a kazayit. Now, why is that so important? Because what that means to us is that we now understand that the questions that are supposed to be asked in the karpas are about how much should we eat? Why don't we eat this much? What do you mean that you can make a brocha on the maror, on the karpas, and it can last for the maror? Why do I need a brocha to last on the maror? What's the obvious issue with the maror? When do you eat maror? You eat maror after you've made hamotzi. So why do you have to make a brocha? You know that hamotzi covers everything, but it doesn't really cover maror. And the reason why it doesn't cover the maror is because the maror doesn't come really as part of the meal. It's an independent mitzvah to the entire to the entire meal. It's a mitzvah in and of itself. And so therefore you have to make that bracha. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. What do we do then? We then move on to yachatz. Yachatz is a shmaka concept, right? You take the matzah and you break it in half. And the Pri Megadim says something interesting. And Pri Megadim says that you must do it with your hands, not with a knife, in order to do what like the poor people do. So, Lionel, if I may ask you a question. Okay. Have you ever tried to break your matzah with a knife?
Never.
Why would you even do such a thing? It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Right? Why would you break your matzah with a knife? No one breaks matzah with a knife.
No.
So the answer to that is because there are different types of matzahs. And we, as Ashkenazi Jewry, have this this hard, like what do you call it? Like a biscuit style matzah, as opposed to the Sephardi world, which have a beautiful, soft, kind of like almost a pita type matzah. And the question is, why can't we have that as well? So the truth is we can. I saw one opinion say that the reason why we have our hard matzahs, I'm not sure if this is 100% correct, but he says it's from a historical point of view, is that because the Jews historically on Pesach in the Eastern European areas, right, always had to be careful and always had to move and were never certain of what was going to happen to them on Pesach, the blood libels and all of these things, which didn't happen that much in the more Sephardi countries, in the amongst the Muslim populations. So because of they never knew, so they had to have a thing that they could easily transport, something that wouldn't go all squishy. And so therefore they made these crackers that were hard, and that's, you know, that's like our legacy. Our legacy is hard matzah crackers. But the halacha is that if you can find these soft ones, then you can have them. Because as long as the matzah has been baked before, it becomes chometz. So it's considered to be matzah. So if you can find any, please let me know, because it would really be something that I would love to have, would love to experience the taste of those matzahs. Okay, let's move on. So now we go on to the beginning of the Seder itself. And the beginning of the Seder, as we all know, starts the following. Halachma anya di'achalu avasana ba'ardim. We all know this is said in Aramaic. And we all know that the reason it's said in Aramaic is because that is the lingua franca of the time. But there are a number of different difficult questions in this halachma anya that I want to just try and understand, because they may present certain halachic conundrums. So let's start. So we start halachma anya, that our forefathers ate in Mitzrayim. Now, where do we know that our forefathers ate matzah in Mitzrayim? Who told us? Who told you? Well, did they?
Yes, it's in Parshat Bo.
Sorry, say again.
In Parshat Bo,
What does it say in Parshat Bo?
that they ate matzahs.
They ate matzahs. Now, did they eat those matzahs in Mitzrayim as lechem oni, or did they eat those matzahs in Mitzrayim as lechem oni, meaning, if we're going to say poor person's poor lechem, did they eat that as lechem oni, or did they eat that as a mitzvah?
It's a mitzvah.
So is that lechem oni? So that's what the Gemara wants to discuss, is what exactly does lechem oni mean? Does it mean lechem oni as in poor person's bread, or does it mean lechem oni lechem she'oni malav dvarim harbe, the bread on which you answer many things? Either one of those doesn't imply a bread of where HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been part of it and has given them the mitzvah to do. So that's not the matzah it's talking about. It's talking about the matzah that they ate. Says the Shemi Shmuel, says most of the writings, it's the matzah that they ate because they didn't have time in Mitzrayim to bake, focaccia bread and like all these nice breads that they could have an asami, go to Frangelica's, eat. They had a rush. They didn't have time. We know that they didn't have time to even spend time with the men and the women because they were just working so hard. So this bread that we start our Seder, we hold it up, halach ma'anya, this is the bread that they ate, but Arad Mitzrayim, in the land of Mitzrayim, under the circumstances of Mitzrayim. And then we say the most bizarre thing. Anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat. Anyone who's needy, let them come and make Korban Pesach. So now the obvious question is, I don't know about you guys, but I've never stood on a street corner, certainly not in Glen Hazel, and said, anyone hungry, come and eat. We used to live in Cape Town. I always used to, everyone's hungry. Make that announcement. You have a line outside of these bakeries that will just like stand outside your door and come and get something to eat. So who are you talking to? Who's this talking to? Why do you say, who are you really inviting? Nobody. And it can't be to the Korban Pesach, because it can't be that, because the Korban Pesach has to be eaten by those who are, there's a minui. You have to have appointed them in the past in order to be part of the Korban Pesach. So who are you inviting to eat, and why is the eating space of it so important? So let's start with who are you inviting to eat? And what are you inviting them to eat? So I think is an important question. We all say this, right? And then we say, we'll come back. Hashata hacha, now we're here, next year we'll be in Eretz Yisrael. Now we are slaves, next year we'll be in Eichorim. Who are we talking about? What are we talking about? So I saw from the Rav Yaakov Milissa. Rav Yaakov Milissa has got a Haggadah called the Maaseh Nisim. And the Maaseh Nisim, the Maaseh Nisim. And in this Haggadah, he discusses all of this, and he asks a question. And he says, we understand that we're celebrating Geula. He says, but it makes no sense to celebrate Geula because we're not in Geula anymore. We've just come out of Purim, and Purim's context gave us this context that we understand that we can't say Hallel, full Hallel on Purim, because Akati Avdei Achashverosh Anan. We are still the servants of Achashverosh, meaning at that point in time, we're still under the aegis of a foreign king. So how much more so now? We're under the aegis of a foreign king of the destruction of Edom. And if that's the case, although we had Geula in Mitzrayim, how can we celebrate Geula today? So he says, let's just look back at what a person does. If a person experiences something wonderful, what do? They invite as many people as they can to experience that, to be in that simcha with them. All their friends and everyone who's around, they invite them to be with them, and they come to them. And when they come to them, they declare how wonderful everything was, and they declare what happened. Part of the process of a Sudat Hodah is not just to say, thank you, but to say thank you for X, Y, and Z, because it's in the X, Y, and Z and the expansion and the exploration of what happened that there really is the true joy, the true simcha that is shared with everybody. So comes along Rav Yaakov Milisa, and he says, so Pesach Seder makes no sense because we're still in Galus. He says, yes, but that's why it says, if we understand that the very foundation and the very essence of our Pesach Seder is to instill within us the concept of emunah and bitachon in Hashem, part of the concept of emunah and bitachon in Hashem is the understanding of what? Of that there will be a redemption. And if there will be a redemption, then it means that even though right now I'm stuck in that galus, that's up to me, that's in a physical way, I can still experience the concept of the original geula, which the original redemption, which sets the foundation of all redemptions. I can still experience that, I can still enjoy it, and I can still celebrate it. How do I celebrate it? I invite everybody who wants to come and eat with me. Yeseh v'yifsach doesn't mean come and eat the Korban Pesach. It means come and discuss what happened over Pesach. Come and discuss what happened then. Even though now we are here in South Africa and we're not in Eretz Yisrael and we don't have the Beis Hamikdash. You know what? Next year we'll be there. Even though now we are slaves, okay? Next year we'll be B'nai Chayrim, we'll be free people. And so therefore, this whole process, written in Aramaic, whilst it's a declaration clearly of being galus, it's also a declaration of what the foundation of our Seder is. And the foundation of our Seder is, and that's so important, the foundation has to be emunah. Has to be emunah. And if our foundation is emunah, then our whole Seder starts with this. This year next year we're in Eretz Yisrael. Now let's get on with understanding what happened and what the Seder is all about. And that's why we know that this piece only came in after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, written in Aramaic, written for us to understand it. I hope that gave a certain level of insight. I don't want to go into Manishtana because everybody goes into Manishtana, and there's lots to talk about in Manishtana. But what I do want to look at is and I'm not going to do it in depth because we haven't got time for that. We're going to do it in like 5 minutes. I want to look at these two stories, okay? There's this one story about Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tar. Okay, these are the great gedolim of the time. They're all sitting in Bnei Brak, and just as we mentioned, Bnei Brak, our hearts go out to those 4 people that were killed, and to their families, and to people that were injured in that terrible terrorist attack tonight. I mean, it just seems to be picking up, and please God, we should have shalom and shalva and sheket in Eretz Yisrael. But they're sitting here in Bnei Brak, and they're speaking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, Kol Oto Halai, the whole night, until the Talmidim come and they say, okay, it's time to say Shema. So, I often wondered to myself, what did they say? What were they talking about? If you go through the Seder, you can go through the Seder, some people finish at 1, at 2, whatever. How do you finish 12 hours of Seder? Remember, you got to start as soon as you can, and they finished where it's speaking about it at Zman Kriyat Shema, which is Alat HaShach. It's 12 hours. What on earth were they talking about? Were they like discussing the halacha? It doesn't say that. There was Hayu Mesaprim Yetziat Mitzrayim. They were actually talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim. And it seems to actually set for us the scene of what our Seder is supposed to be. Now, I'm not advocating, well, it would be nice that everybody stay up till the morning and discuss Yetziat Mitzrayim. But what it is clear to me is that if all we are doing is going through the Seder as the Seder, the format, then we seem to be missing something. We seem to be missing that connection back to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar, Ben Azar, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon. There needs to be more than just this discussion. And look what they're doing. Yemusubin bi Bnei Brak. They're sitting, lying, reclining in Bnei Brak. It's post the meal. It's post all the mitzvahs that they had to do, right? They're just talking. They're talking about all these things. And I often think when I read this in the night of the Seder, and I'll be honest, I haven't yet been 100% successful with it, is that what it's really saying is that if you're up to it, go down to the essence of what the Seder is. And that's this Arami Oved Avi. That's really what it's about. At the end of the day, the Seder is not about Dayenu. It's beautiful Dayenu. But Dayenu is a song Rav Rimon speaks about. Dayenu is a song to get people going. It's a song. Some people need the Dayenu. Some people need this. Some people need that. But really, the depth of the Seder doesn't sit in understanding why there are 4 sons. And that's why I actually like to skip all of those things. But the depth of the Seder sits in this thing of Arami Oved Avi, because the real story is the story of how Yaakov starts where he starts, and he goes down to Mitzrayim and everything that happens. And so if we can just do for 1 minute, really 1 minute, and then we're going to stop. I want to look at this first paragraph. Go and see and learn what Lavan wanted to do to Yaakov. Paro's gezerah, his decree was only on the males. But what did Lavan want to do? Lavan wanted la'akor et hakol. He wanted to uproot everything. Everything. What does it mean Lavan wanted to uproot everything? Remember, our story with Lavan. Now, why does it bring this up here in our Seder? Who cares about Lavan? I'm not talking about Lavan. I'm going to talk about Bnei Yisrael and the Makot. But that's not what the purpose of the Seder is. The purpose of the Seder is to engage with an understanding that, at least according to the Netziv and others, that the shibud, this enslavement, if you remember when Hashem tells Avraham Avinu, it says he'll be in a land that is not his. It doesn't say he'll go to Mitzrayim. He says, but lo lahim. He'll go to a land that not his. Says the Netziv, the original plan was for Yaakov to go to Lavan, and there the shibud should start. That's where it would begin. That was the real place where he should have gone. However, the problem was that Lavan bikesh la'akor et hakol. Lavan doesn't want to just do horrible things. He wanted to uproot the very essence of Am Yisrael. First, he didn't want to give Yaakov his daughters in the right order, and ultimately he actually wants to uproot everything. And that's why it says, originally he was supposed to go to Aram, but Aram wouldn't have worked. And so therefore he went to Mitzrayim. And what therefore is an incredible thing of emunah, bitachon, hashgacha pratit, that we need to then teach our children, our families, and ourselves, okay, is that human beings have the capacity to make choices that will impact on the choices that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes. The original plan, go down to Aram. Because of the evil of Lavan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu changes and does the entire plan. Goes down to the small group of people, of 70 people, into Mitzrayim. And I think that for me is the really one of the major foundations of our Seder is to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's role in the life of Am Yisrael. The fact that he did what he did in Mitzrayim is not something new. It's just a manifestation of the holistic space of Hashem and the way in which he operates for Am Yisrael. And that's really what gets unpacked through the Makot and through everything else that is Am Yisrael Be'ezrat Hashem. We'll discuss a little bit next week. So next week, I'll go more into Hatmana, which is the insulation of things on Shabbos, and we'll do a little bit more. If you're happy with the way we're doing it, do a little bit more on the Pesach Seder as well. That's good for you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Are you happy with that?
Very happy.
Okay. Lekker, guys. God bless. Have a good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shkaya, thank you very much.